7 days passed before the tribunal reconvened. 7 days during which Sioha barely slept, barely ate, spending her hours in the quarters assigned to her staring at walls and wondering if she had done enough. The chamber was fuller than she had ever seen it. When she finally returned, delegates packed into every available space. Species that had not attended the trial now present to witness its conclusion, and the air hummed with tension that needed no translator to understand. Telvern Koss materialized at the highest point. The crystalline arbiter's form, seeming somehow heavier than before, weighed down by the decision it carried. "This court is reconvened for final judgment," the arbiter announced. Voice resonating through the chamber, "The accused species of humanity stands charged with violations of the Compact of Silence. The defense has challenged the very foundation of the law under which these charges were brought." Sioha stood at the defense position, her hands clasped behind her back to hide their trembling, and waited for the words that would determine her species' fate. "The tribunal has reviewed all evidence presented," Telvern Koss continued. "We have examined the original precursor texts, the early enforcement records, the scholarly analyses provided by both the defense and independent observers." The arbiter paused, and the silence in the chamber was absolute. "The evidence is compelling. The linguistic analysis suggests that the translation of the compact may have drifted over millennia. The enforcement records from the early centuries support an interpretation focused on protection rather than isolation." Sioha felt hope flutter in her chest. But the arbiter was not finished. "However, the established interpretation has governed galactic civilization for 12,000 years. Treaties have been signed based upon it. Species have been quarantined under its authority. Entire systems of law and diplomacy rest upon its foundation." Telvern Koss's crystal facets shifted into a configuration that radiated regret. "To overturn this interpretation, based on evidence that is compelling but not conclusive, would create chaos throughout the galaxy. Quarantined species would demand release. Reparations would be sought. The stability of centuries would be threatened." The hope in Sioha's chest began to curdle into despair. "Therefore," the arbiter declared, "this tribunal rules that regardless of what the precursors may have originally intended, the established interpretation of the compact must stand. Humanity is guilty of violations as charged." The words hit Sioha like physical blows, and she heard gasps and murmurs spreading through the galleries, some of satisfaction, others of something that might have been disappointment. "The sentence is species quarantine for a period of 10,000 standard years." 10,000 years, Sioha thought, her mind going numb. 10,000 years of isolation, of darkness, of slow death for everything humanity had ever been or hoped to become. But then she straightened her spine and lifted her head, refusing to let the tribunal see her break. "I understand the ruling," she said, and her voice did not waver. "But before the sentence is carried out, I have one question for this chamber." Telvern Koss tilted slightly, crystalline facets catching the light. "You may ask, what purpose does law serve?" The question hung in the air, simple and profound. "Law exists to protect the vulnerable from the powerful," Sioha continued, "to establish rules that allow societies to function, to create justice where chaos would otherwise reign. But when law becomes a tool for the powerful to eliminate the vulnerable, it is no longer law." She turned to face the galleries, addressing not the arbiter, but the hundreds of species watching. "You have chosen to maintain an interpretation that allows you to quarantine rivals under the guise of protecting them. You have chosen stability over truth, convenience over justice. And I cannot stop you." Her voice grew stronger, carrying to every corner of the massive chamber. "Humanity will accept this quarantine. We will endure it. We are stubborn that way. We have survived ice ages and plagues and wars that nearly destroyed us. And we will survive 10,000 years of isolation if we must. She let the words settle before continuing. But every species in this chamber now knows the truth. You have seen the evidence. You have heard the arguments. You know that the compact was meant to protect, not to isolate. And you will carry that knowledge with you when you leave this place. Sioha took a deep breath. So quarantine us if you will, but understand that you are not enforcing the Precursor's law. You are betraying it, and somewhere in the vast span of time, that betrayal will have consequences. She fell silent, and for a long moment, no one moved. Then Zoran rose from his seat in the observer section. The elderly Velith moving with painful slowness toward the central floor. And every eye in the chamber tracked his progress. I invoke the right of witness, he said. And his soft voice somehow filled the entire space. Telvern Koss went utterly still, crystal facets freezing in place. That right has not been invoked in 1,000,000 years, but it still exists, Zoran replied. In the original compact, in the precursor language, a being who has been saved by another species may speak for their rescuers, may offer testimony that must be heard and considered by any court that judges them. Kethmara's mandibles clicked frantically. This is a delay tactic. The judgment has been rendered. The judgment was rendered without hearing the testimony of those most affected by it. Zoran said, the right of witness predates your interpretation of the compact. It comes from the precursors themselves. Will you ignore even that? The arbiter was silent for a long moment. Then, the right of witness is valid. You may speak. Zoran turned to face the galleries, his four eyes sweeping across the assembled species. I am Zoran of the Velith, the last survivor of the refugees who crashed on Earth 63 years ago. I was there when the humans found us. I watched them risk their lives to save creatures they had never imagined could exist. His voice gained strength as he spoke. They did not know the compact. They did not know the law. They only knew that we were suffering, and they could not walk away from suffering. He pointed at the defense position where Sioha stood. This woman argues that the compact was meant to protect. And she is right, but she has only shown you evidence in ancient texts. I can show you evidence in living memory. Zoran walked slowly toward the galleries, his age evident in every step, but his purpose unwavering. The humans protected us. They healed us, they gave us a home when we had lost everything. And they did it without any knowledge of galactic law, without any expectation of reward, without any understanding that they were fulfilling the oldest promise in the galaxy. He stopped and faced the arbiter directly. If the compact truly meant isolation, then humanity violated it. But if the compact meant protection, if it meant the strong watching over the weak, then humanity is the only species in 12,000 years to actually follow the law. The chamber erupted. But this time, the energy was different. Delegates not protesting but debating, arguing among themselves about what they had heard. A young Vishan rose from the lower galleries, crystalline form smaller and brighter than Telvar and Koss. I stand as witness. I have read the original texts, and the human's interpretation is valid. Then another voice, Idlevan, rising from her position. I stand as witness. I verified the evidence. The translation has drifted. More delegates rose. One by one, species that had been silent now speaking. A growing chorus of voices challenging the established order. Talvern Koss raised crystalline appendages, and the chamber slowly quieted. A vote is called, the arbiter announced. And something in the crystalline voice had changed, become lighter somehow, not on the guilt of humanity, but on the interpretation of the compact itself. Shall we restore the original meaning, protection rather than isolation? Or shall we maintain the established interpretation? The voting began, lights flickering throughout the galleries as species registered their positions. And Seoha watched with her heart in her throat as the balance shifted back and forth when it was done. When the final count appeared on the chamber displays, she had to read it 3 times before she believed it by a margin of 17 votes. The tribunal restored the original interpretation of the compact protection. Not isolation guardianship, not quarantine. The charges against humanity were not dismissed, but recontextualized. Humanity had not violated the compact. Humanity had fulfilled it. Van Kas spoke the final judgment. The species of humanity is acquitted of all charges. Furthermore, in recognition of their adherence to the original intent of the compact, humanity is appointed as guardian species, tasked with the protection of developing worlds until they are ready to join the galactic community. Seoha felt tears streaming down her face, but made no move to wipe them. A Wazerin appeared beside her, taking her hand in his frail grip. You did it. You reminded the galaxy what the law was always meant to be. She looked at him. This elderly alien whose rescue had brought humanity to trial and ultimately to vindication. We did it together, all of us who refused to let truth stay buried around them. The chamber dissolved into motion. Delegates approaching to offer congratulations or simply to see these humans who had challenged everything and won. And Seoha knew that the real work was just beginning. Humanity had been named guardians of the developing worlds, protectors of species not yet ready to join the stars. And that responsibility weighed heavier than any punishment could have. The chaos in the chamber continued for what felt like hours. Species that had been silent for the entire trial, now shouting over each other in languages the translator could barely process. And Seoha stood at the center of the storm she had created, waiting for the arbiter to restore order. Telvern Kos finally raised crystalline appendages that scattered light in sharp patterns. A gesture that seemed to carry authority across every cultural barrier, and slowly, reluctantly, the chamber fell silent. The defense has presented evidence challenging the established interpretation of the compact, the arbiter said, each word resonating through the crystal form like struck bells. This is unprecedented in tribunal history, and the implications are significant. Kethmora stepped forward, mandibles working furiously. The implications are irrelevant because the evidence is fraudulent. This human has spent 30 days fabricating connections that do not exist, twisting ancient texts to serve her desperate purpose. The evidence is not fraudulent, Idleven replied. Her forearms folded in a gesture of certainty. I watched her discover it. I verified it myself through independent research. The early enforcement records are real, and they tell a different story than the one we have believed. Then you are complicit in her deception. I am complicit in seeking truth, which I believed was the purpose of this tribunal. Seoha raised her hand. May the first present the full evidence, so the chamber can judge for itself. Telvon Kos gestured permission, and Seoha activated her display, projecting a comprehensive analysis of everything she had found onto the chamber's holographic systems. The precursor language is not like the languages we speak today, she began, keeping her voice steady despite the hundreds of hostile eyes watching her. It does not consist of words with fixed meanings, but of symbols that express relationships, concepts that shift based on context and connection. She highlighted the key symbol, the one translated as silence. This symbol has been rendered as silence. Isolation, separation for 12,000 years. But when we examine its usage in the earliest precursor texts, we find it connected to very different concepts. New symbols appeared around the central one, connected by glowing lines. These symbols relate to protection, to watching over, to the responsibility of the strong for the weak in context. The central symbol does not mean silence at all. It means something closer to guardianship or stewardship. Convenient interpretation, Kethmora sneered. Perhaps. So let us look at the evidence that does not require interpretation at all. Seoha shifted the display to show records from the early centuries of compact enforcement. These are the earliest cases adjudicated under the compact. In the first 1,000 years after the precursors vanished, look at what species were punished, and for what crimes. She highlighted case after case. The Varant hegemony, punished for enslaving a pre-spacefaring species and forcing them to mine radioactive materials. The Collective of Thomases, punished for manipulating a primitive world's development to create a client state. The Dominion of Rel. She paused, looking directly at Kethmora. Punished 3 times in the first 500 years for exploiting primitive species for resources and labor. Kethmora's compound eyes flickered. Mandibles, clicking in a pattern that suggested agitation. Ancient history. Irrelevant to current proceedings. Ancient history that shows the compact was originally used to protect primitive species from advanced ones. Not to isolate them. The law was a shield, not a cage. Seoha pulled up more records. The first quarantine of a primitive species did not occur until 3,000 years after the precursors vanished. And even then, the justification was that isolation would protect them from a specific threat. It was meant to be temporary. What changed? Telvarn Koss asked. And something in the Arbiter's voice suggested genuine curiosity. Power changed hands, Seoha replied. The species that had been punished under the original interpretation gained influence on the tribunal. They pushed for reinterpretation, argued that isolation was the truest form of protection. And over centuries, the meaning drifted. Guardianship became quarantine, and quarantine became a weapon. She displayed a timeline showing the shift in enforcement patterns. Look at the species that have been quarantined in the past 8,000 years. Almost all of them were potential rivals to established powers. Species that showed rapid technological development. Species that might have challenged the existing order if allowed to join the galactic community. You accuse the tribunal of corruption, Kethmora said, voice rising. I accuse the tribunal of forgetting. And I accuse certain species of taking advantage of that, forgetting to eliminate rivals under the guise of protecting them. The chamber erupted again, but this time the tone was different. Delegates were not just protesting. They were arguing among themselves. And Seoha saw doubt spreading like ripples through the galleries. A delegate from a species Seoha did not recognize rose from the upper tiers. A being of shifting colors that the translator identified as a Tesserine elder. I have a question for the human, the elder said. And the chamber gradually quieted to hear. Please ask. You have presented evidence that the compact was originally meant to protect primitive species. And you have argued that humanity followed this original intent when they rescued developed refugees. But what of your other violations? The broadcasts into space? The signals that violated the silence requirement? How do you explain those? Seoha nodded. She had anticipated this question. The broadcasts were made by a species that did not know the law existed. We sent signals into space because we were lonely, because we wanted to know if anyone else was out there, because hope is a fundamental part of human nature. She paused, choosing her next words carefully, but more importantly, if the original compact was about protection rather than silence, then broadcasting signals was never a violation at all. The silence requirement was added later, part of the drift from guardianship to isolation. That is a significant claim. It is, and I cannot prove it definitively. The precursor language is too complex, too alien, for any of us to interpret with complete certainty. But I ask this chamber to consider the alternative. Seoha turned to address the galleries directly. You can maintain the current interpretation. You can quarantine humanity for 10,000 years. And you can continue using the compact as a tool to eliminate rivals and control the balance of power. She let the words hang in the air. Or you can acknowledge that the evidence I have presented raises legitimate questions about what the precursors actually intended. You can consider that the law you have enforced for 12,000 years may have drifted from its original purpose. and you can choose to return to that purpose. And what would that mean? The Tesserine elder asked. Practically speaking, it would mean that the compact becomes what it was meant to be. A promise that advanced civilizations will watch over developing ones, guide them when they are ready, protect them from exploitation, not isolate them until they die alone in the dark. She looked at Zoran, sitting quietly in the observer section. It would mean that what humanity did, saving lives instead of letting them die, was not a crime, but exactly what the precursors hoped we would do. Telvon Koss spoke, and the crystalline voice carried weight that silenced all other sounds. The defense has presented compelling evidence. The prosecution has objected to its validity. This court must now deliberate. Kathmora stepped forward. There is nothing to deliberate. The established interpretation has governed the galaxy for millennia. One human's convenient reinterpretation cannot overturn. Perhaps not, the arbiter interrupted. But this human has done something no accused species has ever done. She has challenged us to examine our own foundations, to question whether we serve the law's purpose or merely its words. The crystalline form shifted, facets realigning in patterns that suggested deep consideration. This court will recess for deliberation. All evidence presented will be reviewed. All arguments considered. When we reconvene, we will render judgment not only on humanity, but on the nature of the compact itself. Sioha bowed, her heart pounding despite her outward calm. She had done everything she could, presented every piece of evidence, made every argument that might save her species. And now the fate of billions rested in the hands of beings who had every reason to maintain the status quo. As she was escorted from the chamber, she passed Idle Ven, the Tesserine scholar who had risked her career to help verify the truth. Thank you, Sioha said quietly. Dull scales shifted in a pattern that might have been a smile. Do not thank me yet. Truth is a fragile thing, and there are many in this chamber who would prefer it remain buried. I know. But at least now they have to look at it. At least now they have to choose. Yes, Idle agreed. And that may be the most dangerous thing of all. Sioha nodded and continued walking, knowing that whatever came next would change the galaxy forever. The tribunal chambers seemed different when Sioha returned. The shadows deeper, the watching eyes more intent. And she understood that word had spread about her research on lesser delegates who had barely noticed her before, now tracked her movement across the floor. Their expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility to something that might have been fear. And Sioha realized that she had become dangerous to them in ways she had not anticipated. Themora waited at the prosecution platform, the insectoid's mandibles clicking in patterns that the translator rendered as barely contained contempt. The human returns from her fishing expedition. I trust she found nothing of value in the archives. The trial will determine that, Sioha replied. Taking her place at the defense position, Telvon Koss materialized at the highest point of the chamber. The crystalline arbiter's form catching the light and scattering it in patterns that seemed almost agitated. This court is reconvened. The accused species may present its defense. Sioha had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times during the journey back from Thesser. But now that it was here, she felt the weight of it pressing down on her shoulders. Billions of human lives depending on words. She was about to speak to beings who had every reason to dismiss them. Before I present my evidence, she said, I would like to request that a witness be called. One whose testimony is directly relevant to the charges against humanity. Kathmora's compound eyes glittered. We have already presented all necessary evidence. What witness could the human possibly call? Zoran of the Velith, Sioha said. The refugee whose rescue forms the primary charge against my species. I believe his testimony will provide context essential to understanding what happened. The chamber stirred. Delegates exchanging glances that Sioha could not interpret. and she saw Zoran sitting in the same observer section where she had seen him before, his pale blue skin seeming almost translucent under the chamber lights. Stelvern Koss considered for a moment. The request is unusual, but not without precedent. Zoran of the Velith. You will take the witness position. The elderly alien rose slowly, his four eyes blinking in a pattern that suggested nervousness, and made his way down to the central floor where Sioha stood, his movements careful and deliberate with age. Zoran, Sioha began, keeping her voice gentle. 63 years ago, your ship crashed on Earth. Can you describe what happened? Zoran's voice was soft but clear, carrying through the chamber with surprising strength. We were refugees, fleeing the Dominion conquest of our homeworld. Our ship was damaged, navigation systems failing. We had no control over where we would land, and you landed on Earth, a planet whose inhabitants had no knowledge of alien life, no faster-than-light travel, a species that was forbidden from contact under the Compact. Yes, what did you expect to happen when the humans found you? Zoran was silent for a moment, his four eyes distant with memory. We expected to die. The Compact was clear. Primitive species could not interfere with us, and we were too injured to save ourselves. My mate had broken her spine in the crash. My daughter was bleeding internally. We lay in that wreckage and waited for death. But that is not what happened. No, Zoran said, and something in his voice shifted. The humans found us. They were simple people, farmers who lived in that remote region. They had never seen beings like us, had no reason to believe we even existed. And yet, he paused, gathering himself. They helped us. They pulled us from the wreckage with their bare hands, not knowing if we were dangerous, not knowing if touching us might harm them. One man cut himself on the metal of our ship and kept working, blood running down his arm while he tried to free my daughter. The chamber was utterly silent now, every being listening. They took us to their homes, gave us what medicine they had. It was wrong for our biology, but they did not know that. They simply saw that we were hurt and tried to help. My mate died that first night, but not alone. A human woman held her hand through the end, singing songs in a language we did not understand. Sioha felt her throat tighten but forced herself to continue. What happened after that? Their government came, scientists and soldiers, and we feared then that the helping would stop, that we would be taken away and studied, treated as specimens rather than people. But it did not happen that way. What had happened? They argued, Zoran said. For months, they argued about what to do with us. But the argument was never about how to use us. It was about how to help us. Some wanted to try to repair our ship and send us home. Others worried that we were too injured to survive such a journey. They brought doctors who studied our biology not to exploit it, but to understand how to heal us. Kethmora interrupted. This is all very touching, but it changes nothing. The humans violated the Compact regardless of their intentions. I am not finished, Zoran said. And there was steel in his old voice that silenced the prosecutor. You speak of the Compact as though it is sacred, as though the law must be obeyed regardless of outcome. But I live the outcome of human compassion. He turned to face the galleries, addressing not the arbiter or the prosecutor, but the hundreds of species watching. My daughter survived because human doctors worked through the night to understand her biology and stop her bleeding. She grew up on Earth, learned human languages, made human friends, and eventually she had children of her own, half Velith and half human. The first of their kind, murmurs rippled through the chamber. There are 47 Velith descendants alive today, Zoran continued. 47 people who exist because farmers on a primitive world chose to help strangers who fell from the sky. That is the crime you are punishing. That is the violation of your sacred compact. Sioha stepped forward. Thank you, Zoran. I have no more questions for this witness. She turned to face Stelvern Koss. drawing a deep breath before beginning the argument she had come here to make. The prosecution has presented evidence that humanity violated the Compact of Silence. They have shown that we broadcast signals into space, that we rescued aliens we should have left to die, and I do not dispute these facts. Kethmora made a sound of satisfaction, but Sioha continued, what I dispute is the interpretation of the Compact itself. For 30 days, I studied the original precursor texts on Nesser, and what I found will challenge everything this tribunal believes about the law it enforces. She activated her display, projecting the evidence she had gathered onto the chamber's holographic systems. Symbols in the precursor language floating in the air above her. This is the symbol that every translation renders as silence. It appears throughout the Compact. It is the foundation of the law's name and the basis for 12,000 years of enforcement. The symbol hung in the air, its flowing lines somehow suggesting meaning that hovered just beyond understanding. But this same symbol appears in older precursor texts with different context, in fragments describing why they created the Compact, and in those fragments, it is connected to concepts of guardianship, of protection, of watching over. She highlighted the connections, drawing lines between symbols that pulsed with soft light. The precursors did not create the Compact to isolate primitive species. They created it to protect them. The original law was not about silence at all. It was about responsibility. The duty of advanced civilizations to shield developing worlds from exploitation. Kethmora erupted. This is fabrication. This human has invented evidence to save her species. I can verify it. A new voice said. Everyone turned to see Idle Ven rising from the observer section, her silver scales catching the light as she moved to the central floor. I am Idle Ven, tribunal observer and scholar of the Compact for 200 years. I watched the human conduct her research. I accessed records that confirmed her findings. The translation has drifted over millennia. Protection became isolation. Guardianship became quarantine. Telvon Koss leaned forward, crystal facets shifting in patterns of agitation. You are certain of this. I am certain that the evidence is compelling. The early enforcement records show a pattern entirely different from current practice. Species were punished for exploiting primitive worlds, not for being exploited by them. The chamber erupted in chaos, delegates shouting objections in 100 languages. The translator struggling to keep up with the flood of protests, but Sioha stood at the center of it all, watching Zoran return to his seat with the careful movements of age, knowing that whatever came next, she had at least given the truth a voice. The question now was whether the galaxy would choose to listen. The archive moon of Thesser hung in the void like a pearl suspended in ink, its surface covered in structures that had been ancient when the first mammals walked on Earth. And Sioha pressed her face to the viewport of the transport vessel as they approached. You waste your time, said Idle Ven, the tribunal observer assigned to accompany her. A Foron Tezarine scholar whose silver scales caught the starlight as she moved. Greater minds than yours have studied the precursor texts for millennia, and none have found what you seek. Sioha turned from the viewport. What do you think I seek? A loophole, Idle replied with what the translator rendered as contempt. Some technicality that will allow your primitive species to escape justice. It is what every accused species seeks, and is what every accused species fails to find. You sound very certain. I have studied the Compact for 200 years, Idle said. I have read every translation, every interpretation, every scholarly analysis produced by every species in the tribunal's history. The law is clear and has always been clear. Species that have not achieved faster than light travel must be isolated from galactic civilization for their own protection and ours. Sioha nodded slowly. For their own protection, you say? Is that what the quarantine is for? Protection. Of course. Primitive species are dangerous. They act on emotion rather than reason. They make decisions without understanding consequences. They broadcast signals into space without knowing what might hear them. Idle's forearms gestured in a pattern of emphasis. The compact protects them from contact they are not ready for, and protects us from their unpredictability. And the 17 species that have been quarantined in the past 12,000 years, Sioha asked. Were they protected? Idle's scales shifted in a pattern that suggested discomfort. That is not relevant to your defense. I think it might be, Sioha said. I have read what records I could access of those 17 species. Only 4 survived their quarantine periods. The rest died out, isolated and alone. Unable to call for help when disasters struck. Unable to trade for resources they needed. Is that protection? The compact is not responsible for their failures. Perhaps not. But I wonder if the precursors would see it that way. The transport docked at a port that looked like it had been carved from a single massive crystal. And Sioha followed Idle through corridors that thrummed with ancient power. Past chambers filled with artifacts that predated every civilization currently serving on the tribunal, the archive. Itself was a vast sphere at the moon's core. Its walls covered in text that glowed with soft light. Symbols in dozens of languages recording the laws and histories of 10,000 worlds. And at its center, sealed behind barriers of force and light, rested the original compact. There, Idle said, gesturing with 2 of her arms. The actual text created by the precursors 2 million years ago, written in their language on material that is never degraded, never faded. The foundation of everything we are. Sioha approached the barrier and looked at the symbols within. Flowing shapes that seemed to shift and change as she watched. Patterns that tugged at her mind in ways she could not explain. The translation databases are here, Idle continued, leading her to a terminal covered in interfaces designed for a dozen different species. Every attempt ever made to decode the precursor language. Every partial translation. Every scholarly debate. You have 30 days to find what thousands of scholars could not find in 12,000 years. Sioha sat down at the terminal and began to read days, passed in a blur of research and frustration. Her eyes burning from staring at screens, her mind aching from trying to grasp concepts that human thought had never been designed to hold. The precursor language was not like any human language. It did not consist of words with fixed meanings, but of symbols that contained relationships. Concepts that changed based on context and connection, and the more Sioha studied it, the more she understood why no species had ever fully decoded it on the 12th day. She found the first discrepancy. The symbol that every translation rendered as silence appeared throughout the compact. It was the foundation of the law's name, the core concept around which everything else was built. But when Sioha traced its usage through other precursor texts, she found something strange in a fragment describing why the precursors created the compact in the first place. The same symbol appeared, but the context was entirely different. It was connected to other symbols that spoke of care and responsibility and watching over Idle, Sioha said, her voice rough from days of minimal sleep. Come look at this. The Tesserae approached with obvious reluctance. What have you found? Sioha pointed to the fragment on her screen. This symbol here, the one translated as silence in the compact. It appears in this older text as well, but here it seems to mean something different. Idle examined the text, her 4 eyes moving independently as she processed the information. The context is different. That does not mean the meaning is different. Symbols can have multiple applications. But look at what it is connected to, Sioha insisted. These symbols here, my research suggests they relate to concepts of guardianship, of watching over, of keeping safe, not of isolation and abandonment. You are seeing what you want to see. Maybe. Or maybe I am seeing what 12,000 years of convenient interpretation have buried. Seoha pulled up more fragments. Texts she had spent days piecing together from scattered archives. Records of the earliest compact enforcement. Cases from the first 1,000 years after the precursors vanished. Look at these early cases, she said, when the compact was first applied. It was not used to isolate primitive species. It was used to protect them. Advanced civilizations were punished for exploiting pre-spacefaring worlds, for stealing their resources, for manipulating their development. The law was meant to shield the vulnerable from the powerful. Idol was silent for a long moment, her scales shifting through colors that Seoha could not interpret. When did it change? Seoha pressed. When did protection become isolation? When did guardianship become quarantine? I do not know, Idol admitted. And her voice carried something that might have been doubt. Seoha leaned back in her chair, exhaustion and excitement warring in her chest. I think the translation drifted over time, slowly, generation by generation. As powerful species found it more convenient to isolate potential rivals than to protect them. The compact became a weapon instead of a shield. And no one questioned it because the original meaning was lost. This is speculation. Yes, but it is speculation based on evidence. Help me find more. Idol's forearms folded in a gesture of uncertainty. Why would I help you? My role is to observe, not to assist. Seoha met the Tessarine's eyes. Because you have studied the compact for 200 years. And somewhere in that time, you must have wondered. You must have seen the inconsistencies and questioned them. Even if you never said it aloud. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the hum of ancient systems keeping the archive alive. There are restricted texts, Idol finally said. Records of early tribunal decisions that are not included in the standard scholarly databases. I have never been permitted to access them. But my clearance as a tribunal observer might be sufficient. Will you try? Idol stood motionless for a long moment, then moved toward a different section of the archive. I am observing your research methods. If accessing certain records is necessary for that observation, it falls within my permanent duties. Seoha allowed herself a small smile. The first 10 days, they worked together through the remaining time. Seoha analyzing linguistic patterns while Idol retrieved records that had been buried in bureaucratic classifications for millennia. And piece by piece, a different picture of the compact emerged. The precursors had not feared primitive species. They had feared what advanced species might do to them. The compact was a promise of protection, a guarantee that the powerful would watch over the weak until they were ready to join the galactic community somewhere in the vast span of time since the precursors vanished. That promise had been betrayed on the 29th day. Seoha compiled her findings into a presentation that would either save her species or be dismissed as desperate fabrication. It is compelling, Idol said, reviewing the evidence. But compelling is not the same as convincing. The tribunal has operated under established interpretation for 12,000 years. They will not overturn that easily. I know, Seoha replied. But at least now they will have to choose. They can accept the truth and change. Or they can reject the truth and expose what the compact has really become. And what has it become? Seoha looked at the glowing symbols of the original text. The words of beings who had vanished before humanity existed, who had tried to build a galaxy where the strong protected the weak. It has become a lie, she said, a lie wearing ancient clothing. And lies do not survive exposure to truth forever. She gathered her evidence and prepared to return to the tribunal, knowing that what came next would determine not just humanity's fate, but the fate of every species that might ever stand where she stood. Now the original compact had demanded protection, and Seoha intended to remind the galaxy what that meant. The chamber stretched upward into darkness, its walls carved from stone that had witnessed 10,000 judgments before this day. And young Sioha stood at its center, feeling very small and very human. She had been a professor of international law at Seoul National University before the aliens came, spending her days teaching students about treaties and conventions that governed relations between nations, never imagining that one day she would stand before a court that governed relations between stars. The Galactic Tribunal filled the massive space around her. Representatives from 300 species watching from tiered galleries that rose like cliffs on every side, their forms ranging from crystalline beings that caught the light to shadowy creatures that seemed to absorb it, from insectoid delegates with compound eyes to gelatinous masses that communicated through color changes in their flesh. At the highest point sat Telvarn Kas, the chief arbiter, a being made of living crystal whose facets shifted and reformed with each movement, refracting light into rainbows that played across the chamber walls. And Sioha understood that this entity had been judging civilizations since before humans discovered fire. The species known as humanity stands accused, Telvarn Kas announced, the voice emerging not from any mouth but from vibrations within the crystal itself, resonating through the chamber like a struck bell of violations against the compact of silence, the most sacred law of galactic civilization. Sioha kept her expression neutral, though her heart raced beneath her formal suit. The only human in a room full of beings who had traveled between stars when her ancestors were still painting on cave walls. The prosecutor rose from its platform, an insectoid creature called Kethmora, whose segmented body clicked and shifted as it moved, mandibles working in patterns that the translation device in Sioha's ear converted to words. The evidence against humanity is overwhelming and undeniable, Kethmora gestured, and holographic displays bloomed throughout the chamber, showing images that Sioha recognized immediately. Exhibit 1, the prosecutor announced. The objects humans call Voyager, primitive vessels launched into deep space, carrying messages inviting contact. A direct violation of the Compact's requirement that pre-spacefaring species maintain silence. The golden records appeared on display, their encoded messages and images suddenly seeming naive and foolish in this context. Exhibit 2, Kethmora continued. The transmission humans call the Arecibo message, a deliberate broadcast into deep space announcing humanity's existence and location. Another flagrant violation. Sioha remembered learning about that transmission in school. How scientists had aimed a radio telescope at a distant star cluster and sent a message of greeting, never knowing they were breaking laws older than human civilization. Exhibit 3. The prosecutor's voice grew sharper. And most damning of all, a new image appeared, a crashed vessel on Earth, its alien design unmistakable even in the grainy historical footage 63 years ago. A ship carrying refugees from the Vela species crashed on Earth, the crew injured and stranded, and according to the Compact of Silence, pre-spacefaring species are forbidden from interfering with alien beings in any way. They must be left to their fate. This is the law that has governed the galaxy for 12,000 years. Kethmora turned its compound eyes toward Sioha. Humanity did not leave them to their fate. Humanity rescued them, healed them, sheltered them for decades, and in doing so, committed the most serious violation of the Compact in recorded history. The chamber erupted in sounds that the translator struggled to process. Clicks and whistles and rumbles and frequencies beyond human hearing, all expressing what Sioha understood with shock and condemnation. Telvarn Kas raised one crystalline appendage, and silence fell instantly. The penalty for such violations is well established, the arbiter stated. Species quarantine. Earth and its colonies will be surrounded by an impenetrable barrier. No communication in or out, no travel in or out, for a period of 10,000 standard years. 10,000 years. Sioha thought, her mind struggling to grasp the enormity of it. Civilizations rose and fell in less time. Humanity might not even survive such isolation, and even if they did, what would remain of them after 10 millennia cut off from the galaxy? Does the accused species wish to offer a defense? Telvarn Kaz asked. The question carrying the weight of ritual rather than genuine inquiry. Sia had read the records. In 12,000 years of tribunal history, no species had ever successfully defended against compact violation charges. The law was absolute, the verdicts predetermined. This trial was theater designed to legitimize punishment already decided. But Sioha had not spent 20 years studying law without learning that even the most rigid systems contained vulnerabilities. That precedent could be challenged. That interpretation could be questioned. The accused species does wish to offer a defense, she said. Her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. Murmurs rippled through the galleries, translating into 100 different expressions of surprise and contempt. On what grounds? Kethmora demanded. The evidence is incontrovertible. Your species violated the compact repeatedly and deliberately. I do not dispute the facts, Sioha replied. I dispute the law itself. Now the chamber fell truly silent. A silence so complete that Sioha could hear her own heartbeat. Elverum Kos leaned forward, crystal facets shifting to focus on this small human who dared challenge 12,000 years of galactic jurisprudence. You dispute the compact of silence, the arbiter said. The foundation of galactic civilization, the law handed down by the precursors themselves before they vanished from the universe. I dispute the interpretation, Sioha clarified. I have studied ancient legal systems my entire career, and I have learned that laws change over time, not in their words, but in their meanings. Translations shift, interpretations drift, and after 12,000 years, I must ask, does anyone in this chamber truly know what the precursors intended when they created the compact? Kethmora made a sound of dismissal. The compact has been translated and verified by the greatest scholars of 100 civilizations. Translated, Sioha repeated, but the original text exists somewhere. Does it not? The actual words the precursors used. Not the translations of translations that have passed through dozens of languages over thousands of years. She looked up at Telvarn Kos. I formally request access to the original compact texts, in the language the precursors actually used. The request sent shockwaves through the chamber, delegates turning to each other in confusion and alarm. And Sioha understood that she had asked for something unprecedented. Kos was silent for a long moment, light refracting through the crystalline form in patterns that might have indicated thought or calculation. The original texts are stored in the archive moon of Thesser, the arbiter finally said. They have not been accessed in 3,000 years. No living species can fully read the precursor language. Then perhaps it is time someone tried. Sioha said. Kithmora objected immediately. This is a delay tactic, nothing more. The human seeks to postpone inevitable judgment. Perhaps, Telvarn Kos replied. And something in the crystalline voice might have been amusement. But in 12,000 years, number accused species has ever requested access to the original texts. None have ever challenged the foundation of the law itself. I find myself curious what this human believes she will find. The arbiter's facets shifted again, forming a configuration that the translation device interpreted as a formal ruling. The request is granted. The human ambassador will travel to Thesser under tribunal observation. She will have 30 standard days to examine the original compact and prepare her defense. This court stands in recess until her return. Sioha bowed, keeping her expression carefully neutral. Even as hope and terror warred within her chest, she had bought time. Nothing more. 30 days to learn a language no living being could read. To find something in ancient texts that might save her entire species from eternal isolation as she was escorted from the chamber. She passed an elderly alien sitting in the observer section, his pale blue skin marked with age spots. His 4 eyes watching her with an expression she could not read. This was Zorn. She knew, one of the refugees humanity had rescued 60 years ago. The living evidence of the crime that might doom her world. Reached out as she passed and touched her arm with one frail hand. "I hope you find what you seek," he said softly. "And I hope the truth is kinder than the law." Sioha nodded once, then continued walking toward whatever waited for her in the archives of Thesser.